All right, in this lesson here, what we're going to do is take a look at grouping and the various options up under the group menu. So first of all, what is grouping and why is it important? Well, grouping is when you can take multiple objects and, well, group them together to act as a single object. And
combine them, maybe?
Yes and no. It's best to say act as an individual object because they can still act as individuals, if you will, within the group. So they're not combined per se to become just a new object and that's it. They
I see.
Still can get to them individually as objects.
Cool.
So let's go ahead and demonstrate this by creating a couple of spheres. Actually, I'll go ahead and create like 4 of them. This will be handy. Okay, so to group, we can simply come in here. We can do this with one object, but of course the idea is to use multiples. So I'll go ahead and take both of these objects here, come up here to group from my menu, and you'll notice that the only thing I have access to at the moment is group. So I'll go ahead and click group, and I get a dialog asking what name I'd like to give the group. So let's call this my group. Okay, now at this point you'll notice my pivot point just snapped to the center between these two objects, and if I was to deselect and reselect either one of these, it looks like I've got just a single object now. You notice how they both became highlighted.
You also notice your bounding box just extended in your perspective view.
Absolutely. You can see that down here as Zach was pointing out. So I can come in here, I can move this guy around, I can come in, I can rotate it, and it's going to just act as basically a single object. And you'll notice down here, though, that the name is now bold, okay? You can also see down here where we normally see one object selected, 2 objects selected, etc. It now says one group selected.
Oh, very cool.
So now, basically what happened? Well, an invisible dummy object was created, and these two objects were basically linked to that dummy object. And so that dummy object can now be moved around, it can be rotated, we can animate it, etc., etc. And yet we can still get to the other guys if we wanted to and apply animation to them individually, or we could go in there and we could modify them with modifiers individually, etc. So how do you get back to them? Well, if we come back up here to group, with a group selected, you'll notice that we now have several things that have become highlighted up under the group menu. We've got ungroup, open, and explode, and we'll take a look at all of these in just a minute, but let's go ahead and start first with open. So I'll go ahead and click open, and what's going to happen is you're going to see that we now have this bounding box that becomes visible in this orthographic view. And as a matter of fact, you can see it really well down here in perspective. What I'm going to do is just simply hit G to turn off my grid, and you can see now that I can select the objects, individually. So if I was to move, you'll notice that this box surrounding them grows with them. Okay? So that's how you open a group up to get back to the objects inside.
Okay.
You can still access the entire group. In other words, I can still select the group with a group open and move everybody by simply clicking on this box. You'll notice that I can still move the group around.
Oh, very nice.
So to close a group, all you need to do is just select one of the objects, come up to group, and hit close. You'll notice at this point I only have 2 things available outside of group itself, and those are close and detach. So close, you'll notice the box has now gone away, and we're just left with what appears to be a single object again. Okay?
All right.
So let's go ahead and come back in here. Let's open the group back up. Let's select one of these objects, and let's go ahead and see what detach does. Boom. Detach is going to simply detach that object or take that object out of the group.
Okay, cool.
You'll now see that my box is surrounding just this one object.
It's a nice grouping system. I like this.
Yes, it's very nice. So now how would I go about taking an object and putting it back in a group? Well, just simply select that object, come up here to group, select attach. And you'll notice as I move my mouse around, it's just a regular pointer. But the moment I move it over a group, I can then click, and it will add that object into that particular group.
Cool, so you can designate which group you're attaching it into.
That's right. So now if I go ahead and come back up here to group, let's go ahead and close the group. That'll make the box disappear. And let's take this object right here and add it in as well. So come back up here to group. Again, attach, come down. You'll notice now, since the box is gone, I can't put my mouse over that. I just move it over either of the objects inside the group, simply click, and it's now been added. Okay?
Very nice.
So we can also do group nesting, okay, which is having groups within groups. So at this point, let's see. We come over here. Let's open this group up only because I'm being picky. Let's move that up. Let's go ahead and close this. So we've got this group selected, which is acting as a single object. And if I was now to come over here and Control select this object right here, and then come back up here to group and come down here and hit group, Now what we're about to have is a group that contains an object and another group of objects.
Okay, so you have a group inside of another group.
Yes, we're now doing nested groups. So we'll call this my group 2, like such. Go ahead and click OK. And now, you can see it looks like we have a single object. If I come up here and now say open up the group, okay, there's our box again. Select this guy, moving him around. Or if I select over here, look at that.
You see the original group.
You got it. And it still acts as a single object. Okay, simple enough. This stuff becomes really powerful when you're dealing with tons of objects. You need all of those objects to react together for one reason or another.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this brings us to the point of what's the difference between ungroup and explode. Okay, well, explode will immediately take every single object that's grouped, even subgroups, okay, so nested groups, and take all objects and take them out of the groups. Everything will become back at root level, if you will.
Okay.
Ungroup will simply ungroup the current group that is selected. So right now, we've got one group selected, and inside that group it contains one object and another group. If I was to come up here and hit ungroup, here's what just happened. This object became a regular object again. That guy is still a group.
But my group is maintained. That's cool.
Now, let's go ahead and right-click, and let's come back down here to ungroup. Undo. There you go. So, and let's go ahead and refresh our viewport there. So now, again, if I select, so in other words, I've got one group, and in the group is an object and a group. Now if I come up here and say group, explode, now let's look at what just happened. Individual, 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 individual.
So it gets rid of all groups that are within that group, everything.
Exactly.
It just goes right back to the original object.
That's it. And finally, one last thing, even though we haven't really got into animation at this point, there is one other thing that I'd like to show you. I'm going to go ahead and undo all the way back to the explode. I'm going to come down here and hit Auto Key, and I'm going to start dropping some keyframes just to demonstrate how animation is going to work. So right now I've got my group selected, and I'll just simply move this over. So you can see now that my whole group has got animation on it. Now what I want to do is go ahead and come up here and open up the group, grab this one object inside. You'll notice that there's no keyframes down here on the track bar anymore. That's because we have the ability to still do individual animation on the one object. And this allows you to do some really neat things when you start working with
wild.
Wanting to do some complex animation. You can look at it as like doing layered animation, if you will.
Oh, yeah.
So now with this guy up here, we can take him if we wanted to. Let's just go ahead and move back over here somewhere, and perhaps up, and maybe we'll jump him way down here. And if we wanted to, we could even open up this group, and remember, we can still apply individual animation on the one.
Wow, so really quickly we got into some complex animation.
Yes. So there you go. Okay? I just thought it'd be kind of nice to show that real quick.
Very cool.
So again, we'll just come up here and close that group, and then we'll come up here and close that group. We're back to what we've got originally. You can see all of the keyframes down below. Okay?
That's great.
And that's pretty much all I wanted to do in regards to showing you how to work with groups. So we'll finish this off with a quick group, explode, and we now have all of our individual objects. And now if we move this around, check that out. The only animation that we kept was the animation that we applied to these two objects individually, because if you remember those dummy objects that were created and invisible and everything was basically linked to them, and that's our transform, if you will, for the group, well, they've been deleted.
Right, we animated the groups and then we deleted the groups.
Exactly. So with that, that's going to conclude this lesson on groups. So thanks, guys.